Over the next hour or so, we're going to share the best information we have at this moment from outstanding panel of Cleveland Clinic experts, including Dr. Christine England, Dr. Michaela Gack, and Dr. Melissa Leing. Doctors, thank you so much for being here. We'll hear from each of you shortly, then we'll open up the conversation to address the many questions submitted by the audience. Over the next hour or so, we're going to share the best information we have with these experts. So to get us started, here we go. Dr. England is our Vice Chair of Department of Infectious Diseases at the Cleveland Clinic. Could you start by telling us your role at the clinic and an update on the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure, Laura. Thank you so much for letting me participate today. This is wonderful. So I am a full-time clinical infectious disease physician. I practice mainly at the main campus of Cleveland Clinic right here in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. Started seeing my first inpatient COVID patients a little over a year ago. It's hard to believe it's been a whole year. But those patients that we were seeing were quite ill right off the bat. And most of the time we spent in the intensive care units hand in hand with our intensive care unit colleagues, trying to learn about it and trying to deal with not only frightened patients, but frightened caregivers as well. So it's been a long year. It's been a learning year. And hopefully we are at some times where we can start to see a little light at the end of that tunnel. But in the meantime, we need to keep an eye on the fact that there are almost 130 million cases of COVID that have been diagnosed worldwide, with nearly 3 million deaths as well. When we talk about here in the United States, we've hit over 30 million cases here in the United States alone, and we just topped 550,000 deaths in 1 year. When you look at that on the grand scale of things compared to wars, we've topped all of the wars over the last century as far as death go. And the CDC just reported that COVID-19 was the third leading cause of death in 2020. So this is certainly something that we need to keep an eye on as we continue to move forward.
Yes, indeed. And, you know, as we started to hear about this pandemic and COVID-19, now, just when we thought we got our arms around it, we're hearing about the variants. Can you talk a little bit about the variants as it relates to this pandemic?
Absolutely. So here in the United States, we started off with the wild type virus so far as we know, and that's just the basic SARS-CoV-2 virus that was initially found. In other countries, to be quite honest, they've done a much better job of looking for different variants than we have here in the United States. So we first started hearing about these different variants of the virus, say from the United Kingdom. You'll hear the number B117, and that's a variant that has been found to be about 30% more transmittable and also about 30% more lethal. So it is clearly something that we need to be keeping an eye on. There are variants that we hear about from South Africa. And then I think probably the more concerning variant is the P1 variant from Brazil, because we're, you know, if you've watched the news at all from the folks in Brazil, they are just being devastated by this disease at this point in time. Now, variants don't stay in one place. They can certainly move, and we've seen each of these variants here in the United States in small numbers so far, but again, we have not been tracking them as well. So I suspect the more we look for it, the more we're going to find. So it's very important for us to make sure we keep track of these variants, and then also to try to understand how our vaccine works against these variants. And for right now, it looks as if the current vaccines that we have on the market are still performing against these variants. They may not be quite as effective, especially against the South African and the Brazil variant. They're doing quite well against the United Kingdom one. And ultimately, this may mean that as we see more variants, we may need to see some booster shots or some changes as to the makeup of the current vaccines.
Well, that is very important information. Thank you for sharing. And I suppose the good news or the light in all of this is that our community is being vaccinated. And I just read on as of Friday, March 26th, that the United States administered over 3.4 million doses in one day. So the good news, I suppose, if there's light in this, is that we're seeing the vaccine get out there. We'll talk more about the distribution. But to your point, what behavior do we still need to follow now that, again, many of us, I hope, have been vaccinated?
Absolutely. I have, that's for sure. So the CDC has set out some pretty clear guidelines that still offer us a little bit of more flexibility and a little bit more freedom, but still ask us to be cautious and careful. So if you're meeting with a few people who have all been fully vaccinated, then you don't need to mask and you can meet indoors. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of freedom to be able to do. If, say, you've been vaccinated and let's say your grandchildren have not been vaccinated, you can still meet with them as long as it's one household, so that you are not getting exposed to a lot of different virus and you're not exposing them to a lot of different virus, but it can be in one small household. We don't want multiple households getting together, so this is really not the time for those family reunions that we've been missing, or for those family vacations that you want to take. Not yet. We're just not there yet. So anytime, even if you've been vaccinated, when you're out in public, we still want you to wear your mask, social distance, use hand sanitizers. It looks as if when you're vaccinated, you're not likely to transmit the virus, but we don't know that for sure. So we certainly don't want to take the risk of getting the virus into our nose and our mouth, and then wiping it and then passing it on to somebody else. So we still need to be cautious. We still need to be careful. We still have a lot to learn.
Thank you. We'll be back. We've got a lot more questions for you. But next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Michaela Gack. Dr. Gack is the Scientific Director of Cleveland Clinic's Florida Research and Innovation Center in Port St. Lucie, Florida. So Dr. Gack, how does your work at the Florida Research Innovation Center relate to the current pandemic?
Yeah, first of all, Laura, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on the panel. So here at the Florida Research and Innovation Center in Port St. Lucie, a major focus are really many of these viral infectious diseases that we have been talking about. It's, mainly, of course, currently SARS coronavirus 2, but also still other important respiratory viruses. We are also studying still influenza viruses that are continue to be, out there and, medically and clinically very important. We also study several mosquito-transmitted viruses, also very relevant for the Florida area or any areas with a hot or warm climate. These include Zika and dengue and also West Nile virus. And we also study viruses that is a different group of viruses, and these are ones that can cause cancer. About 20% of all human cancers are caused by viruses. Maybe to most people, most well known is human papillomavirus, but there are many other viruses such as hepatitis C virus or hepatitis B virus that can cause cancer in humans. So we are really studying these viruses at a molecular level. How do they infect humans? How do they spread? How do they cause disease? And we also do translational work on any of these viruses in terms of, can we develop effective antivirals? Or can we, develop new vaccines, or for some of them, improved vaccines? For many of them, there are already vaccines. We have learned with the new vaccines for SARS coronavirus 2, for example, one needs to sometimes adapt these vaccines potentially in the future. Or what we are looking at is also making some vaccines that are already out there, making them more stable, especially thermostable. Some of them require very, very low temperatures. That is a problem generally, at least in many countries, to deliver them, to get them safely and still stable to, into the arms, let's say. And this is, one research effort that we have here, making existing vaccines more stable. I should mention we are really a part of a much larger program, and this is the new Global Center for Pathogen Research and Human Health that Cleveland Clinic just recently has been established under Jay Jung's directorship. So we are really tightly integrated within this center, but also we are very much or closely collaborating here with the Cleveland Clinic regional hospitals here either in the Florida area, but also up there in Ohio.
Yes, thank you. One of the amazing facts during this pandemic is that you and your colleagues, Dr. Jay Jung and Dr. Tim Chan, are really were recruited prior to the pandemic, moved here during a pandemic, and set up a global research center during a pandemic, during the most important time that the work that you're doing is needed. So I can't imagine how you all managed to do that, and yet continuing to have an impact in terms of your research and journals. So what lessons have we learned in this past year in the expediency of this work?
Mm-hmm. So certainly we have, experienced and learned many good things, how effective and fast we can, for example, develop vaccines, given, if we have new technologies like the mRNA technologies and all the concerted efforts, by so many different scientists and doctors, of course. So we have learned this was a major part in, what we have learned. And we are very confident if, there were in the future another outbreak or pandemic that we can, equally, fast develop these, vaccine efforts. We have also maybe learned that, in terms of antiviral development, that we maybe can do better, or we hope we can do better in terms of research to maybe, until we have a vaccine, antivirals are absolutely key. And we know vaccine development takes time. So the current problem, what we have is that, if a new virus emerges, we first have to learn, a significant amount about this new virus in order to then test, certain antivirals. So what we are here doing at the Florida Research and Innovation Center, we look into how I call it ready-to-use broad spectrum antivirals. And this is all, it's still in development, what we are kind of looking for, meaning antivirals that could not only target one single virus, but potentially a whole, many different members, likely from one virus family, and thereby could also be effective against any new virus that we don't know. We don't know what's the next virus for the next outbreak or the pandemic. So this is, I think, that's a rethinking in the virology and infectious disease community that basically stimulating the search for looking into these broad spectrum antivirals.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for laying that out so clearly. We'll be back to you as well. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Melissa Liang. Dr. Liang is the Medical Director of International Operations at Cleveland Clinic. Please tell us a little bit about your role, in particular around the Cleveland Clinic's response to COVID-19.
Sure, thanks, Laura. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's been very exciting this past year, although it's been a tough year for everyone. It's been a very exciting year, even with everything that Dr. Gak's team is doing in terms of the research, everything that Dr. England is seeing with her COVID patients in her clinic, and then the things that we're doing on the operations side in terms of logistically testing as well as vaccinating patients. So I've been involved with the Cleveland Clinic's community COVID efforts, coordinating with the state, with other hospital systems, the local health departments, community health centers, as well as the community organizations in terms of bringing access of COVID testing, personal protective equipment, as well as vaccines to the community. And certainly helping with coordinating the COVID vaccine rollout, initially in the hospitals and in the skilled nursing facilities, and then out to the general adult public. And so we continue on the different phases of the vaccine rollout as eligibility is now expanding in Ohio to adults greater than the age of 16. So that's all been an incredible team of teams efforts from the state to the local levels. So incredible to see.
Yes, thank you so much for your work. It is incredible. In recent months, the conversation around vaccine distribution was largely related to supply and demand. I felt like you could score a vaccine shot. It was like getting tickets to, Bruce Springsteen concert or something. But now it feels like supply is catching up to demand. So at least here in the United States. So what are you doing and your colleagues doing around vaccine acceptance? And how are we reaching those in rural areas or underserved communities?
So that's a great question, Laura. You know, a lot of what we are focusing on now, because supply has increased over the past several weeks, is education, outreach, dispelling myths, and really having more conversations regarding vaccine safety, and the effects of the vaccine, not just on individuals, but on the community in helping us to come out of this pandemic. You know, in terms of the supply, you know, why is it important? And I'm sure Dr. England can speak to this point. Why is it important for us to get people vaccinated as soon as possible? You know, Dr. England has already mentioned the variants that are coming out that that are more contagious. And so in order for us to really contain the pandemic and to control it, we've got to get jabs and arms faster to prevent further hosts to grow even more variants. And so just in terms of the US data, we have administered 148 million vaccine doses in the US. And thankfully, 73% of US adults over the age of 65 have been vaccinated with one dose.
Wow.
50% of our adults over the age of 65 have been fully vaccinated. But there's still more work to do, because the adult population over the age of 18, 37% of the US population has received one dose, and 20.7% of the adult population has been fully vaccinated. So, you know, for us to get to herd immunity, we've still got a lot of work to do. But we do see that with supplies increasing, that by July 4th, there will be enough vaccine doses for all adult Americans to receive their vaccine. So in terms of the education and the outreach, we've got a lot of work to do, because all those folks who wanted to get the vaccine are going to get their vaccine. We've got to convince a lot of people who don't want to get the vaccine that they should really consider getting the vaccine to help protect themselves, their families, as well as their communities.
Thank you. We're going to get to try to dispel some of those myths when we get to the roundtable. But let me ask our panel if you've been vaccinated. So I'll start with you, Dr. Gak. Can you tell me about your own? I realize it's a bit more personal, but have you been vaccinated, and a little bit about the process and the impact with you and your family?
Sure. Yes, first of all, yes, I have been vaccinated. And I have to say, we are here in Infectious Disease Institute, as you know, and we work with SARS coronavirus. So also, you know, many, if not all people here at the Institute also, of course, received the vaccine. We received it right, you know, across the pond where we are at the Tradition Hospital. So that was a major moment, you know, also here for everyone at the Institute, because as we know, you know, the vaccine, you know, will allow us also to, you know, to safely interact with our loved ones, but also, you know, to make it safe completely, you know, to work with the virus overall. Well, on a personal note, you know, I have a little family and a small daughter. So the vaccine, you know, of myself and also my husband, you know, made a big difference in terms of that. Now my daughter, who is 3 years old, can now go to, you know, preschool. She has been, you know, like many small kids, been at home for the past year. And, you know, that, as you can imagine, you know, that will bring some challenges. But in the end, you know, she's back at school, and we also, you know, are to some degree back to normalcy, not completely as everyone, but, you know, to some degree.
Yes, indeed. It's a step towards normalcy. Dr. England, you've really been on the front lines of this in your department, and personally, would you mind sharing your story?
Sure. So yes, I have been intimately involved with coronavirus to the point that I had it back in May. Unfortunately, also managed to give it to my son. So you want to talk about the guilt of dealing with this virus. Passing it on to a child of yours is not something that you take on very lightly. So when I was finally able to get vaccinated in December, I tell you, just as we got the folks who are on the front lines vaccinated, just the stress you could feel in those intensive care units just started to go down, because people were dealing with the stress of dealing with horribly ill patients, but suddenly there was much less fear about, am I going to be laying in that bed next. So the temperature really was able to come down, and people were able to focus a lot more in on their roles and less on the fears that they might have been having. And I was certainly able to feel that as well. So even though I had COVID, I really felt it was important to get vaccinated as well, because we don't know how long your immunity lasts. And so I encourage anybody, even if you've had COVID, make sure that you're getting the vaccine as well. You know, the fear of passing it on to somebody else is something in all of our lives. I had my father-in-law living with us for a couple of months, and being in at the hospital and seeing patients, and then coming home and being afraid that I was going to pass it on to him. I mean, you go through all different kinds of things, getting undressed in the garage and running upstairs to shower and trying to keep my distance from him. It was horrible. And now he's vaccinated, and you know, life just becomes so much freer. Like, again, you know, we still have to be very careful here at the hospital and at every family health center. We are following the strict rules still of masking and wearing eye protection. Even if you're vaccinated, we don't know who else isn't. So you enter any of the Cleveland Clinic hospitals and really across the country, we're still going to be masking and wearing those eye protection for a long time to come.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story. I think it's also a reminder, if you don't get the vaccine, you saw, you know, up close and personal, the impact of getting COVID-19 and the importance of getting vaccinated. Dr. Ling, could you share your story and journey with us?
Sure. And thank you to Dr. England and Dr. Gack for sharing that. I did get vaccinated and was very happy in doing so, and appreciate Dr. Gack sharing about the impact of, you know, the pandemic to her family, to her young children, and then Dr. England's story about the impact in the work area, as well as for her own family. I did want to share the pandemic's effect on my family, not specifically from a COVID infection, but from the pandemic in terms of delaying care for other chronic diseases. You know, unfortunately, my uncle had delayed care. He was actually diagnosed with colon cancer before the pandemic in October 2019, and underwent surgery December 2019 to remove a tumor from his intestine. And we have a family history of colon cancer, so this actually was not surprising. But when the pandemic started in the US, you know, at the end of February and then March, and things started closing down with the lockdown, he was afraid to go into the hospital for his 3-month follow-up and for his repeat CAT scan and for his follow-up visits with the oncologists and with the gastroenterologists. And what happened was he ended up having to go into the emergency room in May 2020 because of worsening abdominal pain. And we found that his cancer had spread to the liver already. And he ended up opting not to undergo any further treatment, and he passed away in August 2020. And so, you know, I think about that. And again, I was never infected with COVID, neither was he. And neither was anybody in our family, but I think about the effects on just everything else in life, and how there was just so much fear in my family and in the community about going into the hospitals. And honestly, right now, the hospital's just about the safest place to be. And what I would encourage those listening is not to delay your care. That, you know, the hospitals are safe. You can come in, you can get your care taken care of, you can get your annual physicals done. But I really saw how the pandemic impacted the family outside of the COVID infections. And I think we can get past a lot of this fear. There is hope. And certainly with the vaccination, I feel a lot of hope, and I feel people can come out of their houses soon. And again, I think a lot more normalcy will come.
Wow. Well, Thank you all for sharing. It really humanizes the impact of this pandemic, and appreciate you sharing it with our listeners. Now I'd like to turn our attention. We have lots of questions from our audience. I'm going to try to summarize these questions and put them in themes for you to address. So first, I'd like to focus to Dr. England. I think it's a direct question for you, in particular around what we're calling long haulers. You know, people who, like yourself, were infected with COVID-19 and symptoms that they might still be, you know, impacting their health and the treatments available to them.
Absolutely. That's such an important disease process that we're going to see happening for years to come, frankly. We were all so focused in on the acute illnesses for so many months. And then you started hearing stories about people who had been infected months earlier and still couldn't return to work and still couldn't take care of their families and were having symptoms of not just fatigue, but neurocognitive deficits. They couldn't remember things. They would go into stores and not remember why they were there. And not being able to re-enter the workforce because of those mental fogginess or brain fog, as we see. But there's also chest pain and the sense of smell that doesn't come back. And that may not sound like it's that important of a deal, but think about it. What if you can't smell smoke and your house is on fire? You know, you're not going to know that. So there really are some serious repercussions to those kinds of events. So there's a whole smattering of symptoms, and we're learning more and more each day about what is causing these symptoms. I've typically seen it. So to address that need here at the Cleveland Clinic, we've opened up a center called the Recover Center. And in that, we're seeing patients who have a diagnosis of a clear diagnosis of COVID by a PCR test, because we want to make sure that we're looking at people who clearly had this disease and the entity. But we're seeing patients who about 35% of people were hospitalized. That means that 65% were not sick enough to go into the hospital. Now, they may have been at home feeling pretty badly, but these are not the folks that you typically think of that were in the hospital. We're seeing it about 80% women right now. And that seems to be fairly consistent, somewhere between 50 and 80% of women, but we're seeing it at all ages. Our youngest is 19 so far, and our oldest is 85. So it really impacts a great swath of people. And the studies are showing right now that anywhere between 30% and 80% of people who ever had COVID are going to have long-term persisting symptoms. So I think if you remember, we talked about the fact that in this country, we've had, oh my gosh, we've had 30 million people who have had COVID in this country. If you take 30% of that, we're at about a million people so far who are going to have persistent symptoms. So we're evaluating them, and then we are getting them to any of 18 different specialists who have raised their hand to say, I'm here to help with these long COVID symptoms and to help try to understand how we can get these patients better. So anywhere from our neuropsych teams to our physical therapy teams to cardiology to sleep studies, because people have insomnia, GI issues because they're still having abdominal pain. Hopefully, we're going to learn a lot more over these next number of months, but in the last 6 weeks, we've been open so far, 7 weeks. We've seen a lot of people and we're learning a lot. So this is going to be something you're going to continue to hear about. And one last plug, another reason to get your COVID vaccine, because you don't want to come to my clinic. You don't want to have to come and see me. I really want you to not get COVID, so that you don't have this long haul disease. So for young people who think, oh, it's no big deal, I'll get over COVID quickly. Yeah, that's what some of these folks thought too. And months later, they still can't get back to their exercise routine. They're having difficulty making dinner and they can't get back to work. So think about that if you don't want to get your vaccine.
Thank you so much. And I'd really like to spend some time and having you all help us address these myths we're hearing about the vaccine and the safety of the vaccine. So I'm actually going to start, with Dr. Gak. Why don't you talk about, you're each gonna, I'm gonna give you each an opportunity to debunk a myth out there. So Dr. Gack, I'll start with you.
You know, one, maybe I don't call it myth, but one major concern is at this point about the current vaccines and the variants. You know, we talked, Dr. England, a little bit earlier about it. You know, how effective are they? And in terms of, you know, getting severe disease, hospitalization, and potentially death, they are very, very effective. I mean, they might not 100%, and we are still learning about that for some of these variants, not 100% protect against getting the virus and maybe transmitting it, even though I have to say this is still under investigation. We still have to really validate that. And they're actually very promising data on that it actually very well protects also some of them against transmission. But importantly, the current vaccines are very, very effective against the currently circulating variants in terms of protecting everyone from needing to go to the hospital or even worse. So this is very important. And I hear also some people ask what vaccine is better. Is there one that is much better? All of the 3 currently available ones here in the US, they are all very effective protecting us against severe disease and needing to go to the hospital. And this is, you know, very important.
Great, thank you. Dr. Liang, since you've been on the operations side, you know, I wonder if you could talk about, some people say, oh, I hear people get so sick and there's all these side effects of the vaccine. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing about the side effects, and that's why people maybe is a reason why they don't want to get vaccinated?
Sure. Well, I would say one easy myth to debunk is that there are no chips in the vaccine. But that does, I mean, it sounds silly, but it does come up. You know, I do, you know, I know Dr. England also does, we do a number of educational webinars and talks with the communities, and that does come up. And so there are no chips in the vaccine, and so the government can't follow you that way. So that's an easy one to debunk.
No, it's important. Thank you for saying that. Absolutely.
Okay. And in terms of the safety of the vaccine or some of the side effects, so I got Moderna. I think there was a question on the chat about which vaccine we got. I got the Moderna vaccine. And Moderna and Pfizer are both the mRNA vaccines, whereas the Johnson & Johnson is a one dose, it's a viral DNA vector. And so in terms of the responses or reactions to the vaccine, you know, what people should expect is possibly some fever, chills, but certainly some soreness at the injection site, which really is not different than if you got your tetanus booster or your measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. So these are pretty typical vaccine reactions. And it's just telling us that your immune system is responding to the vaccine. But certainly one of the things that have been a concern is whether it's safe for pregnant women. And so certainly the vaccine safety monitoring, there's an app for that. And we are monitoring events after people receive vaccine. And as far as for pregnant women, we know that it is safe. There are no adverse events related to the vaccine that are occurring at a higher rate than women who are not vaccinated. So I did want to bring up that fact. And I was kind of sore with chills for 24 hours after my second dose of Moderna. But otherwise, I was back at work. Actually, I continued to work, but I was fine afterwards. So I will accept the 24 hours of discomfort for the immunity. So
great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think, you know, Dr. England, I think there's a lot of questions for you on the myth front about if people are pregnant or nursing. And what the question for you of what vaccine you got after COVID, is there a difference having COVID and what vaccine you should take?
So I got the Pfizer vaccine, you know, I would have taken Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, would have taken any of them. Happy to get any of those into any of my loved ones. Whatever is out there, I'm encouraging them to take it. I just happened to be early on because of our intense work on the front lines, and Pfizer was rolled out first to us. Having had the disease before, I had more symptoms after the first vaccine dose, I think because I already had some antibodies primed in my body, and I woke up and felt like I had rheumatoid arthritis. Every joint in my body just ached. And the first thing I did is I rolled over and called one of the rheumatologists and said, "Do you want any of my blood? Do you want to study this? I'm just curious about this." But she said, "No, go back to bed." So I ended up taking some ibuprofen after that and felt better. But you hear all these bad things about side effects, but you know what? Side effects are good. Side effects from this mean your body is responding. You're developing an immune response. So if somebody says they're having aches and a little bit of some fever afterwards, congratulate them. That's a good thing. We want to make sure that you're building up the immune response so that when you actually see the COVID virus itself, your body's ready to attack it. If you don't have symptoms, you're probably still developing a good response as well. But look at it that way. Hey, that's a sign that your immune system is really nice and healthy. I agree with the statement before that Dr. Liang was talking about with the pregnant women. There's a lot of data coming out now that we've had a lot of shots into the arms of pregnant women, and we have seen no detrimental effects on the mom or especially on the baby. There was unfortunately some really awful myths early on about infertility and about the new mRNA virus vaccine causing infertility. The protein that this mRNA virus is against, called the spike protein, is totally different than the proteins on the placenta that were being postulated as developing an immune reaction to. So it's been completely debunked, but unfortunately there were a lot of nurses on the front line for several months who were being told very bad information and were, appropriately afraid of getting the vaccine, because often our nurses are in their 20s and 30s and in their reproductive state. So it's awful when you're in the midst of this and you see some of these horrible untruths that are really keeping people from being able to protect themselves. But hopefully we're able to debunk that myth here as well.
In addition, one question came up on the chat about the safety of the vaccine for people with blood clotting issues. Can anyone comment on that?
Yeah, so we've seen a number of different issues. The disease itself is very clotting. So I would be much more afraid of getting COVID. One of the things that we learned early on is that a lot of the complications that these patients were having was blood clots into the lungs and blood clots in their extremities. So if you have any concerns about it, there really is no risk, no significant risk of getting the vaccine, certainly as compared to getting COVID itself.
Great. Well, exciting news. I think we saw today Pfizer released the study on the vaccine in a trial on children from the ages 12 to 16. I guess I'm going to open this up for your thoughts on when that's the number one question we keep getting, is when can we expect children to be vaccinated?
It looked at a small number. So when you look at each of the other trials, we were looking at 30 and 40,000 people in each of the trials, whether it's for Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, or Pfizer. But we were also looking at people from the ages of 18 up to, 90. So we had a lot more people there. This study that has just been released from 12 to through 16 was looking at 2,000 adolescents. And of those 2,000, half got placebo and half got the vaccine. There were 18 cases of COVID in those adolescents, and they were all in the placebo. So no adolescent who got vaccinated developed COVID. So, that number's 100%. You can't do better than 100%. We on the panel were talking about that earlier, and that's wonderful. As we start to get larger numbers, that 100% may drop down. But still, when you're talking about anywhere between 90 and 100% of efficacy of a vaccine, that is amazing. We really don't see that in too many other vaccines. So it is fabulous news, and studies are ongoing right now, looking at children from the age of 6 months up through 12. So hopefully we'll start to get more and more information as we start to get more testing results from these younger folks. And the more kids we can get vaccinated, the more likely that we can have families going on vacation themselves.
Thank you. Dr. Ling, I think a big question is, when do we think with the supply coming in, when do we think we'll be at herd immunity, or what will it take to get to herd immunity in terms of those shots in arms?
So just in terms of the US population, kids make up 25% of our population. And so if we had all of the adults immunized by July 4th, because we will have the supply for that by then, that would be 75% of the US population being vaccinated. But then again, that's all adults. If we include our children, and I believe that we will be able to start vaccinating children probably by the summer, or certainly by the fall, that will certainly bring up the numbers much quicker. The thing is that with the variants that Dr. Gack and Dr. England have discussed, is that, in order for us to have herd immunity, even against the variants, the percentage would need to be higher. So instead of just 75 and 80%, it may need to be even at 90% in order for us to achieve herd immunity. So, I bring that up because it is, in order for us to reach those percentages, it will be important for younger patients to get vaccinated. And I know in some of the questions, certainly there continues to be vaccine hesitancy. It was clear for older folks who are at higher risk of death and complications of COVID, but how do we now convince the younger folks to accept the vaccine? And again, that's going to be work that me and my team will be doing over the next several months.
Good, thank you.
Maybe
Dr. Gack.
Okay, I wanted to add something, maybe more from the virology perspective. That this virus is changing and mutating. First of all, I get this question a lot. Is not unique to SARS coronavirus 2. Actually, many so-called RNA viruses are changing. We know that most well for influenza virus. That is actually the whole reason why we need every year a new shot, because within a year the virus has changed so much that the vaccine is, either not working or suboptimal, and therefore we need, every year the shot. What is really important in terms of what we mentioned, herd immunity, and I think overall, we don't know exactly what the number must be, and that has to do also with the variants. But nevertheless, what is really important is that we get really a high percentage of the population getting the vaccine as fast as possible. And one reason for that is also, if this would drive down and slow down also the further mutation of the virus. So this is important. That virus will change. It will constantly change. So viruses constantly change. Many times, actually, it doesn't change the behavior of the virus. But, if you wait long enough, at some point it can, change the behavior. It can actually get more mild. That's also actually a possibility. But what we have seen with some of the strains, they can now spread more easily, and some of them, it looks like they cause a little more severe disease. But importantly, if we get a really high percentage of the population vaccinated really fast, this would also significantly slow down the further mutation of the virus and lower the emergence of new variants. So it's really important that hopefully we can convince more and more people to get the vaccine.
Yes, thank you. I know if you can follow up on this question about, if you're fully vaccinated, can you still transmit the virus to others who are vaccinated or are not vaccinated?
This is still, I would say, under investigation. That's also the reason why it's still recommended to wear masks, because this just, all the studies need just some time to really confirm how well can these vaccines protect us. And then maybe the challenge is also another problem. It's not only one virus, there are multiple variants, which makes it just more difficult to analyze that. There are already some data out there, which are actually very promising, that the vaccines, protect to a high degree against transmission. But I want to say at this point of time, I think we nevertheless need more studies and also looking at the different variants, how really effective these vaccines are for getting the virus and transmitting it. And again, to mention it one more time, the current vaccines are very effective against, protecting us from the severe disease. And again, it needs more study to look at really transmission ability and what the effectiveness and efficacy is for these vaccines.
Yes, a couple questions, and maybe the answer might be, seek your physician's advice, but a lot of questions on who, when, and who is eligible to receive the vaccine. So, for example, if they're an organ transplant recipient, if they got a mammogram, if they're going to have a major surgery done, are there recommendations about when they should receive the vaccine, or how long they should wait after receiving the vaccine to have those types of procedures?
Those are great questions. I certainly think that one topic that has become popular is the topic of mammograms. And we have seen evidence that when you get a vaccine, your body does what it should do, is the local lymph nodes react to that as they're building up that immune response. And those lymph nodes can sometimes be misread on something like a mammogram as being an abnormal spot, because we've got lymph nodes all throughout our breast tissue as well. So if they're activated and a little bit enlarged, it can be misread and then take people down the path of needing to get further testing, whether it be an ultrasound and then potential biopsy for that. So I think at this point in time, my recommendation would be get your vaccine and then see if you can put off your mammogram for about a month's time. That gives you plenty of time to really be able to build up that immune response and then have those lymph nodes start to decline. So don't put off your mammogram for a long time. Just maybe give your body a chance to respond appropriately to the vaccine and then get that done.
Thank you. Dr. Ling, on other maybe chronic disease management or surgeries, your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly in the state of Ohio, all adults over the age of 16 are eligible to receive the vaccine. In terms of patients who are undergoing bone marrow transplant, we do recommend that they get the vaccine before they get induction therapy so that they could have an immune response to it, as opposed to having their immune system suppressed after induction therapy. That would be the only time where we are specifically recommending for patients to receive their vaccine, and even for organ transplant, to have it done before the organ transplant so that the immune suppression doesn't affect the immune response to the vaccine and affect immunity. But in terms of other chronic diseases, we would recommend the vaccine to be given as soon as the patient can receive it.
Thank you. We do still have, unfortunately, people getting testing positive for COVID and probably certainly being admitted into the hospital. Dr. England, I'm going to ask you to respond. We've seen, I know there was a paper published recently on our outcomes of treating COVID patients. And can you talk about what we've learned and some of the outcomes of our treatments and the types of treatments we're providing?
Yes, well, thankfully, over the last year, we have been doing across the country, across the world, we've been doing a remarkable improvement in how we're able to treat patients than we were a long time ago. I think a lot of the trouble initially was first in understanding what the virus was in and of itself, but then as hospitals got overwhelmed, you had people having to be shifted from positions that they were not necessarily used to doing into trying to care for people. So patients as hospitals were overwhelmed and using what personnel they could. As we were able to then get the right people into providing the care, at least what we were able to see here in Cleveland, where we had a lot less of a push than we did in other cities and states. They really started to look at at what the underlying process was, not just the virus itself, but the underlying issue, which is mainly the inflammation. So the virus certainly attacks, but then there's also this inflammatory response that comes in. So we learned very early that giving patients steroids and fairly aggressive doses of steroids helped cut down the inflammation, and that thus then allowed us to either cut down on the oxygen that they needed or hopefully be able to get the tubes out of their throats. We've been using certain antivirals. I know that Dr. Gak mentioned earlier, so remdesivir has been an antiviral that we have been using fairly regularly. On top of that, we do have some monoclonal antibodies that are being studied all over the world, which are basically antibodies that are made specifically against the virus itself. Our intensive care unit providers are amazing in how they've been able to learn how to manage the ventilators differently so that they're able to deal with the way that the body is responding to this virus. So it's just been remarkable. We still see people dying, unfortunately, every single day. About 1,600 patients a day in this country are dying every day from this. So it's certainly a horrible disease still, and we have a lot more to learn, but we're managing it better, and that's certainly a good sign.
Thank you. Dr. Gak, could you comment, someone had a question in the chat about the difference between the vaccines, between J&J, Moderna, and Pfizer. Is there a fundamental difference, and if so, what is that?
So it's certainly the technology. So Moderna and Pfizer actually use a never used before in terms of vaccines technology. That's the mRNA technology. So in this case, an mRNA molecule encodes the spike protein. The spike protein, most of the vaccines use, it's actually the surface protein on the surface of the virus. And we know that it's very immunogenic. So meaning it's perfect to stimulate, our immune system and thereby mimicking the whole infection, even though it's of course not the whole virus. It's just, one protein that is encoded in this mRNA. So the mRNA is injected, and the mRNA is a messenger which then leads to the expression of this single protein of the virus, the spike protein, and this then triggers everything further, meaning the immune response in our body. So then we also have a newer technology, I can say, for Johnson & Johnson, and this is a viral vector. This is based on adenovirus. It's a viral vector. It's not a complete intact virus, but actually we call it vector because from this adenovirus, actually most of its genes have been stripped off, but it's actually used to again encode one of the SARS coronavirus proteins and thereby deliver it. In this case, it's a viral vector. It's DNA based. So both is nucleic acid based, and they are down the road, not yet licensed, but there are other technologies, protein based technologies and others in the works, even though they're currently not authorized, at least not in the United States, but there are multiple different technologies. So they're either RNA based, DNA based, or meaning in this case a viral vector, and they are also in the works some subunit or protein based vaccines. These are kind of the major platforms, how we call them, vaccine platforms that are out there, and some of them are authorized and some not yet, but likely will be authorized in the future.
Yeah, and in speaking of that authorization, someone said, we keep using the word emergency authorization. Does that mean it's not safe? Can you and your colleagues talk about, the use of emergency authorization? And I think maybe some of the hesitancy was the expediency, of getting the vaccine out there. Can you and your colleagues comment on that, please?
Yeah, I can start. In terms of all the research on this and studies in terms of safety, they have been all conducted in a very thorough way, similarly as for our approved vaccine. So this is now emergency authorization due to the pandemic versus real approval. As you know, for some of the vaccines, we are still testing how well they protect us, for example, against being able to transmit the virus or infect the virus. So certainly in terms of efficacy for disease, as well as for safety, they have been very thoroughly tested. But again, there are some aspects, for example, what I just mentioned, the transmission, that is still, in under investigation and still being tested. And this is, one reason why it's not yet fully approved, but we use the emergency authorization.
Thank you. And Dr. England or Dr. Ling, do you know if, or do we have the statistics, and maybe it's the same response of how many people do we know yet are either testing positive for COVID or getting COVID after being vaccinated?
So the numbers are really quite small for those who are getting COVID after the vaccine. I've seen some numbers reported out of a recent paper looking at roughly 34 patients after 1 million who had been vaccinated. So we're talking about 0.00. I mean, we're talking a trivial percentage at that point in time. The vaccine is not 100% effective. It is listed as 95% effective. Certainly of that 34, I believe only 5 of those even required hospitalization. So the numbers, even if it's not fully protective, as we see with many other vaccines, it should hopefully decrease the severity of the infection that you're going to get. So these are, again, remarkable numbers when we look at the tiny amount of people who are getting the vaccine, who are getting COVID after getting vaccinated. And when they do, they're not getting it to the severity that they probably would have certainly beforehand. So along with what Dr. Gak said, certainly the science behind creating these vaccines has not been shortened necessarily. It's been a lot of the red tape and a lot of the push with getting funding to these pharmaceutical companies so that they can all out start making these. I mean, there were a lot of pharmaceutical companies that worked really hard on making vaccines and didn't get effective vaccines. And yet we still learned a lot about that, but they needed funding to be able to shut down everything else and focus in on that. So there was a lot of money that went into getting this race going. And that helped us to really shorten the amount of time that was necessary. One other question that I saw was why it's taking us so long to get into the children. Children are always very difficult to start off with trials. It has to do with consent. And this is something that is really important. Adults can consent for themselves. Children, parents have to consent for them. So trials for children are always going to be delayed just because of the legalities and the ethical nature of doing that testing in them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we sign off, because we're at the top of the hour, we could be talking all day. We've got so many questions and we'll try to respond to everyone via email. But is there anything we haven't covered or something that you think is important to mention as we close out? I'll start with you, Dr. Gak.
I have mentioned especially, also with the herd immunity and the mutants. So I make it very short because we talked about it, but I think it's maybe a good thing to say it one more time. I think, really getting the vaccine will be so important, not only to protect yourself, your loved ones, getting back, to a quiet or relatively speaking normal life, but it will also make really for the community and globally make a difference because what I mentioned, about these variants and slowing the virus down in terms of mutating further and maybe really changing dramatically. So it's really important, not only for yourself and your loved ones, it's even really bringing the whole world, back to normalcy and getting back our normal life.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Liang.
I did want to bring up, Laura, you had asked the question about positive cases coming up. And, we were seeing a very promising decline in positive cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, but we are seeing an uptake in number of positive cases, particularly in some states. And we have seen an increase in hospitalizations, particularly in Northeast Ohio with COVID cases. So the fight continues, but there is hope. I also did want to mention we've had over 30 million positive cases of COVID, which represents less than 10% of our US population. So the only way to reach herd immunity safely without excess death is with vaccination. That is the only way. If we try to reach herd immunity by just spreading COVID, we would have many more deaths, and with over 500,000 US Americans already fall into this disease. Again, vaccinations are really our only way of moving past this pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And Dr. England.
Sure. So in looking in the chat room, I've seen a number of chats about people who want to get the vaccine themselves, but they have family members who don't want to get the vaccine. I think the best thing to do is to really try and understand where they're coming from. Are they afraid of it? Is this something that they've gotten misinformation somewhere, and really try to debunk it that way? I have heard such a variety of rationale and reasons for people to not want to get the vaccine. So it's hard to be able to say, give them this point of information and that's going to change their mind. It really depends upon where they're coming from. Make sure that they're getting their information from a good source. Make sure that they have an opportunity to watch events like this and really go to the sources that are trustworthy, like the Centers for Disease Control, to be able to get good information. At this point in time, we're not mandating vaccines, so we can't force people to, but you also need to talk to them that you're going to then have to make decisions about keeping your family safe and keeping their distance. So tough decisions that are being made, just make sure that they're well informed.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and your thoughtful response to many questions in this important conversation. So we'll leave it there. I want to thank Dr. Christine England, Dr. Michaela Gack, Dr. Melissa Liang for your time. And again, all the work that you're doing at the bench and bedside. And for our audience, thank you for taking the time to join us today. For the latest updates, please visit COVID-19 vaccine website, clevelandclinic.org/COVID vaccine. I'm Laura Kalafatis, Chair of the Philanthropy Institute at Cleveland Clinic. Be well, stay safe, stay resilient. Thank you.